Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, our guest is Patti Black with Bridgeworth Wealth Management. Welcome, Patti.
Hey, Gary. I'm thankful to be here today.
Great. So, Patti, tell us how you got into, the financial industry. What was it that kind of spurred you into continuing here?
Yeah. So Gary, I was in college and I needed an elective class. And I found this introduction to personal finance. And I thought, oh, well, that would be a good elective, that'll meet the requirement to graduate. And that'll also be good information for me as I graduate from college. And I got into it and realized, wow, I can do this for a living. Like, I really enjoyed it, felt it was very helpful for me personally, and then was so excited to hear that I could help people do this kind of work and answer questions they may have for a living.
Right. So, obviously when you first got out of college, you didn't go straight to Bridgeworth. Where did you get your start at?
Yeah, so when I graduated with a degree in consumer sciences with a concentration in personal financial planning. And so I was lucky enough to get a job right after graduation as a paraplanner. So in our industry, that was one of the entry level positions. So I learned from the ground up at another firm here in Birmingham, Alabama, where I practice, and stayed at that firm for a number of years prior to it being acquired by a larger organization. And when that event occurred, I was looking around trying to find, where my new home should be. And that was about 4 years ago. I found Bridgeworth and have been here ever since.
Oh, that's great. So tell us what is it that gets Patti excited every morning before she comes in the office about, personal finance and helping people?
Yeah. Gary, I like learning new things. So I like learning things for my benefit and being able to share those with clients. So I really enjoy, just learning and sharing that and passing that along to others. And I really value the great feedback I get from clients about what a difference talking about their personal financial situation, answering their questions, what a difference that makes. It's so rewarding to me to hear, gosh, I have more peace of mind now that I have, begun working with you about my financial future. I have more clarity about what I need to be doing, steps I need to be taking. That's very rewarding for me.
That's great. So, what are some of the big mistakes that you see people making when it comes to personal finances before they come to you?
Yeah. So Gary, this is probably going to be the most boring answer that I can give, but it is so true. And that is people not knowing what it takes for them to live, not tracking what their spending is. It is really difficult to do any kind of long-term projections to figure out, do you have enough, or do you have enough to retire if we don't know, well, what kind of standard of living, how much is it going to take for you each year? Most people have a pretty good idea of the regular recurring expenses. So they can probably tell me, here's what our utility bills are, here's what our homeowner's insurance premium is, here's the real estate taxes. But where they often get tripped up is, what do we pay? What's a good average number to use for home maintenance and repairs? I don't know about at your house, Gary, but at mine, those aren't expenses that typically happen every year, but at least every couple of years, there's probably going to be some bigger money that's spent, or maybe they don't have a good idea of what are they spending on gifts for family members and for friends. It's easy to forget about the wedding gifts and the baby shower gifts and only to think back to, well, I know in December I spent a lot of money on Christmas gifts. So it is really not fun to think about tracking expenses, but it really is such an important piece of the work that we do.
Yeah, you didn't use the word, but that B word, budget. I go through that with people all the time. It's like, okay, well, when they ask me for their business, how much should I be taking in payroll? It's like, well, how much do you need to take in payroll?
Right.
How much do you need at home? And talk to them about their, their budget. And you'll be amazed the number of people that even have a business that don't have a budget and don't operate off of that.
Yeah.
And I always try to tell them, it's like, how can you, if something goes wrong, how do you know how much you need to have? A lot of them are like, well, how much should I have in savings? It's like, well, you need to tell me how much, you need. And, there's different people think about different amounts that need to be how many months and so forth. But, that's something that I think is really important for people to be able to do that planning.
It is, Gary, and part of the joy of my business, and I'm sure of yours as well, is everybody's different. So there's no one size fits all answer when it comes to, all right, well, here's how much you need to have set aside in savings, because one person, there may be two people with very similar income, but with very different lifestyles, and so the answer for one could be a much higher number and a lower number for the other.
Right. And especially also depending on what type of, retirement account that they may have through their employer, lots of times makes a big difference. And working for, a government agency or someone that is paying for your health benefits, and you'll have them in retirement versus not.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of considerations to take when you're looking there. So what are some of the questions that, as clients are coming in to see you, that you wish that they were asking you, but they don't?
Yeah. So, one of the questions that surprises me that doesn't get asked very often is, well, Patti, what happens if you get hit by the bus? Then what's my relationship with Bridgeworth Wealth Management? And that's a big issue, right? If I could be hit by the bus at some point, I'm going to retire, right? And so, and I have a great answer for that. We've got a team approach here within our office. So we've got other advisors who get to know my clients. I get to know their clients. So we may not have the same depth of relationship, but at least there's some sort of relationship. We also have great tools and procedures in place to document the work that we're doing, so that if, God forbid, I got hit by that proverbial bus, there is information that's stored in our system so that someone could come in and at least know the facts. Maybe they don't know the personality and don't know all of the family members and players involved, but they at least have the facts of the situation. So, I think that's a really important question to ask is, what is that succession plan? What happens, if the worst comes to pass?
Yeah, and I think people should be asking every professional that they have on their team. They need to be asking that question, because it is true. Something may happen at some point in time, and you need to know what the fallback plan is.
Yeah.
So your clients that are coming in, or maybe even some of the clients that you've started working with now recently, what are some of the biggest fears that they have, and how do you help them overcome those fears?
Yeah. So, Gary, I'll say COVID has created a lot of fear.
Yeah.
I think back to last March and how quickly the stock market declined, and the fear and the panic that were in so many of my clients. And what I did in that situation, and what I will do in the next crisis, whatever that may be, is to educate and to be an objective partner, to give them information about their personal situation, to say, here's where you are now, here's some steps specific to your situation that you can be taking right now, or maybe you don't need to do anything. Maybe everything is still okay. I can tell that information to the client as well. So just being that objective source of information, helping them to stay accountable to the goals that they've already set are important. People really, after the fact, say that was very helpful, and they really appreciate that.
Right. Now, price always seems to be an issue with everybody. I shouldn't say a problem, but lots of times, I know when people come into me, the first question isn't, how are you getting paid? And then, when I first started out, we got down the road, and then I'm like, okay, here's my bill, and at that point, then you seem to have issues. I mean, how do you overcome that type of a situation?
Yeah, so in regard to the price, I think it's so important. I'm a fiduciary, so that means when I work with clients, I have to make sure that their interests are held before my own, which sadly in my industry, not everybody holds to that fiduciary standard. So pricing, it's very important to be transparent. Here are the ways that the fees that we charge, and here's how those fees are calculated. And I actually met with a woman about 2 weeks ago where we were talking about her situation. And I just said, again, from a fiduciary standpoint, it doesn't make sense for you to pay the fee. But here's what we can do. Based on what you're telling me, here are a couple of steps that you can take that will really benefit your situation right now. So being transparent about the fee so that there aren't questions or concerns about it after the fact, and then if it's not appropriate for them to pay that fee, helping them, at least get started on the right path.
Right. Now, what are some things, I mean, give us one thing that, now you've been doing this for a number of years.
Yeah.
What's the one thing that you wish you knew then that you know now?
Yeah, so Gary, I'll say personal finance is maybe more personal than it is finance. You're blending income and expenses and investment accounts, which are all numbers based, with people's goals and with their values. So that makes a difference. If it were just about the numbers, it'd probably be a lot easier. I'm betting you have that same experience as well.
What are some common mistakes that you see people make when it comes to personal finance?
Yeah, one of them is both spouses not having a relationship with a financial advisor. Oftentimes in a couple, there is one person who is the family's chief financial officer,
Right.
who knows more about the details and has kind of the, here's what we're doing and why. But I encourage both spouses, regardless of whether one has assumed that role, to participate in meetings, to have a relationship with a financial advisor, because just as I could be hit by the proverbial bus, well, so could the family CFO. So it's very important that the spouse who maybe is involved in the planning and in the details, at least has a big picture understanding of, well, where are we going? Why are we doing this? And has a relationship with someone that he or she has confidence in and feels like is a trustworthy partner in their finances.
Yeah, I think that that's something that's really important. I can't tell you the number of times that I'm dealing with, the non-chief financial officer spouse after the other one has passed away, and just trying to help them put the pieces together, because there's so many times that, and we talked about this a little bit before, about not having your team work together, being,
Right.
Your CPA, your financial advisor, your estate planner, or just your personal attorney, talking and making sure that everything is there. So when something does happen to one of the spouses, that, you already have your roadmap to be able to know, okay, these are the things that we need to take care of. And so many times it ends up being, the spouse that's been responsible for everything is the one that passes away first. Yeah. And then there's so much to make up for later on. And people tend to, kind of, I don't want to say panic, but they panic and they get paralyzed by it because they're not sure what to do.
Yes, well, and I have such empathy, because that is such a time of, if someone has died or maybe suffered a serious injury, and that is such a time of grief, and it is very hard to think clearly when you're grieving, and that is not the time you want to be going out and finding a new advisor. You want someone that you've already got a relationship with, a trusted partner already in place, rather than having to go out and interview and find someone then in the middle of a crisis.
Right. So kind of piggybacking off of that, so why is it important to have a professional like you there to help someone?
Yeah. So, Gary, I think part of the value that I bring is asking, maybe uncomfortable questions and making sure that both spouses, everybody's got a different perspective perhaps on retirement and what that's going to look like, but getting those perspectives out into the open, getting them on the table, thinking, having uncomfortable conversations maybe about retirement and what that's going to look like. And also, goals at the end of life, what does the estate plan need to look like? How should wills and trusts be established? Maybe even talking about, how do we care for aging parents? If that's something that adult children may need to include in their financial plan, how do they have those conversations? So someone who is knowledgeable about the technical side, but also willing to ask, perhaps some questions that aren't as fun to talk about, but are really important.
Yeah, I think that's, inevitably people, never want to talk about, death and the end of their life, but it is so important. And there's so much, at least I know from a tax planning standpoint, there is so many advantages to talk about it and make sure that you do plan for it. So then that way, the hard-earned money that you've saved up over the years that you want to leave to your kids and grandkids and stuff like that, it's not being taken by Uncle Sam in taxes,
Right.
because you didn't do the proper planning. So
Yes, yes. And perhaps looking at opportunities, depending on the financial situation, maybe there's an opportunity to share some of that inheritance during lifetime, by making some annual gifts and getting to see, those gifts being used wisely by adult children or grandchildren, and perhaps it's giving some money to charity at death or during lifetime, making those decisions within the context of what's important to you, what are your values, and then what's the impact on your financial future?
Right. Talking about giving some of the annual gifts and giving to charity. I know lots of times that when I talk to the clients and let them know that, hey, you're starting to draw on your IRAs and retirement, so your RMDs, did you know that you could do a charitable distribution from there and not be taxed on the money, it not show up on your tax return, and because you're claiming a standard deduction, you kind of get the best of both worlds with this. And a lot of people don't know that, and this comes from just not being educated about it. But this is where someone like you and me need to talk to be able to help the client. I get to see on the tax return, hey, they're giving 10 grand a year to charity, and most of it's to their church. How do you feel about, the qualified charitable distributions and so forth? So I think that's even more reason why we need to work together as a team.
Yes. And then I would bring in the estate attorney on the will side. Beneficiary designations are such an important part of the estate plan.
Right.
And just piggybacking off your idea of using those qualified charitable distributions during lifetime, it may be beneficial if a client wants to leave some money to charity at death, to use a retirement account to get some money to charity, because the charity doesn't have to pay income taxes. Whereas if you're leaving that money, if it's a traditional IRA or 401k that you're leaving to children or grandchildren, they are going to pay income taxes when they take those distributions.
Right.
So you're right. Just having that partnership between the financial advisor, the accountant, the estate planning attorney, so that we all have individual roles to play, but partnering together to have those bigger picture discussions about what's in the client's best interest. How do we do this work in a very tax efficient manner?
Right. And I think that's always the bottom line is, you've worked hard to get this money, you've been taxed on it. Let's not get taxed on it again. And how can we keep as much as possible? In your lifetime with working with people with, personal finance, what is the one piece of, I guess, best wisdom that a client has given to you, or that you've learned in dealing with all the different clients from, all different walks of life?
Gosh, there's a book that I really like called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he has a line in there. He has a number of just such great wisdom and advice. And one of them is habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. So that reminder, if you can start, even if you start small, early on. You and I, Gary, both know the benefit of, starting early in life with saving and investing. And
Right.
we've seen the benefits for clients down the road who've done that. So that reminder of, maybe you can't maximize your retirement account this year, but could you increase it by 1% or by 2%? And then put a note on your calendar to come back and revisit that in another 6 months to say, can I bump it up another 1 or 2%? Because most of us aren't going to miss an extra 1 or 2%. But if you could
Right.
get in the habit of, just making that incremental change, I know that makes a big difference over the long run.
Yeah, I always try to, again, like you said, starting early. I always like, getting with the young taxpayers when they first start working to get them to start putting the money away then.
Yeah.
Because you don't see it. And then every time you get a raise, okay, you're taking a piece of that raise and putting more of that away in savings. And it may not always be a retirement account. It just may be an outside savings account. Or investment, just to be able to, just if not anything, the simple compounding of interest is going to make a big difference for them.
It does. I also love this idea of the 50-50 rule, which means that when someone gets a bonus, that you can use 50% of that money to go and have some fun. Maybe you use it to go on vacation or to buy some furniture. You can use it to have some fun, but you can't acquire a new payment. Meaning you don't need to use it to go buy a car, because then you might have a car payment and then additional car insurance and car taxes. Use it to go have some fun, but just don't acquire a new payment with it, and then commit to saving the other 50%. So that's been a good tool to give to clients as well. That's
great wisdom there. We seem to be somewhat on the tail end of COVID at this point. What is the biggest challenge that you're facing in your business right now?
Yeah, I would say one of the big challenges, I lead our firm's internal training for younger employees. So we call it Bridgeworth University. So most of our young employees have graduated with a degree, either in personal financial planning or in finance. But there's still a lot to learn, even after you've graduated from college, and even after you've gotten a professional designation like the CPA in your world or the Certified Financial Planner designation in mine. So leading that group internally, thinking through, what are the topics that are going to be most meaningful, most needed for those younger advisors who don't have quite as much experience, and thinking through how we do that training well. So for example, we've done some things like reading and discussing the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And then we're also bringing in some advisors who work internally within Bridgeworth who are more experienced to share about their successes and their failures along the way, trying to say, all right, maybe I can save you from a mistake I made by sharing my story, or maybe I can help you with a win by sharing how I had, some success earlier.
Right. So we've covered a lot of material in a short period of time. What question have I not asked you that you wish I had?
Yeah, so I love to read. I mentioned that I like learning new things, and that's really enjoyable for me. And so just, as far as books that I would recommend to people who want to learn more about personal finance, one that I recommend to younger people is Ramit Sethi's book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. Yeah, it's filled with just great practical advice that someone who is just starting out in their career can take and implement. So I refer that book often to the children of clients, or sometimes even grandchildren of clients, to use and to implement. And then an oldie but goodie book is The Millionaire Next Door. I don't know if you read that years ago, but so much of what I read from it, I still, hold in my heart and in my head. So those are some great books on personal finance. And then I mentioned the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. That's just an all around, book that's helpful, whether it comes to personal finance or your physical health or just how you manage your day-to-day workload. Lots of great information in there.
That's great. That's great. So, Patti, if our listeners have heard what they like with you and they would like to discuss things further with you, how can they reach out and talk to you?
Yeah, so you could find me on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, I'm Patti Black, CFP. And then I'm also on Twitter at Patti B. Black. And Patti is with an I, P-A-T-T-I.
So I'd really like to thank you for your time today. Our guest has been Patti Black with Bridgeworth Wealth Management. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. So good to be with you today.